Bill Andrews, it's good to talk with you.
Thanks, Scott. You too.
Can you remind me and the listeners when we first met?
Indeed, I can, Scott.
Because we go back a ways.
Yeah, we do indeed. We go back to 2005 when I heard you presenting at the Evolutionist Psychotherapy Conference in Anaheim.
Yeah.
And earlier in 2005, I'd come across a book called The Heroic Client,
Right.
which it was like a bit of a revelation for me, really, at a particular point in my own thinking. And I thought, oh, these guys sound like they know what they're talking about. And
Yeah.
so I went to Anaheim and I heard you speaking, and I followed you around actually like a groupie because I wanted to hear all of the arguments you were presenting, because you had such a contrarian position really to everybody else that I heard out there. So
And the dominant position that you thought I was contrarian to.
Well, it was that wedding to the idea of models. The idea that if we could just learn to do this stuff right, and we could learn to do it in specific sorts of ways, that all would be well. And what you were offering was a very, very different viewpoint, really. And one that was much more about realizing that there are many, many ways of working with people, and not everything is going to fit for everybody. And I really liked that. I really liked what I was hearing.
And that sort of leads to a decision being made about how do we move forward? How do we act with our clients? If there are lots of choices out there to choose from in making services work, then how do you make a decision? How do you figure it out?
Well, do you know, Scott, just yesterday, Atul Gawande was presenting the third in the series of Wreath lectures. We have these important lectures over here by some eminent learned person. And he was talking about in the field of medicine and the future of medicine. And it amused me because he said one thing that in medicine we've been not really good at doing at all is privileging clients' priorities, simply asking clients about what their own priorities are, and then carrying out those priorities. So he was giving the example of people who had very little time to live, and a study that was done of these cancer patients, none of whom lasted more than 4 months. But only 1/3 of them were actually asked by their physicians, what do you feel is the important thing for you in the last 4 months of your life, sort of thing. And those who were asked had far better outcomes in the sense that they got to do what they wanted to do. Now, that might have been simply to go home and be with their families. They actually lived longer than the people who weren't involved in offering their own priorities. And they just had a more peaceful exit, if you like. And
Right.
what Atul Gawande was saying is, that we've been very poor at privileging people's priorities. And the other thing he said is that there is a way to find this out. And he said, science has told us about this. You ask the patient, you ask the client.
Right.
And I mean,
This I think was really the message of the heroic client back in 2000 and then again in 2004, that why aren't we simply asking the people that we work with what they would like, and then privileging whatever choices they might be making.
absolutely, absolutely correct. And I suppose what led from that for me then was, well, how can you develop tools to help you in that process? Now, obviously, I became familiar with your ORS and SRS way back then. I've been using it ever since, as have many, many others around the world. But then, obviously, there are sort of many different types of services and organizations that have differing requirements, etc. And so this eventually led me on with my colleague Tony Jordan to think about developing a measure that we as clinicians would like to have, that we as working at the front line of everyday practice, what would we like to have available to us? And that's what led on eventually to the development of Pragmatic Tracker that we'll be chatting about.
So is Pragmatic Tracker a measure? What is it exactly?
Pragmatic Tracker is a simple, flexible, adaptive tool that can contain any measure actually. And the idea of it is to be generic. It's not wedded to any particular measure. It has the ability to have any type of measure within it. It's a tool, it's an adaptive tool that facilitates those conversations with our clients to actually ask them about how things are progressing and to help figure out what their priorities are.
So there are a variety of web-based systems, software systems that are currently available. Is there something unique about Pragmatic Tracker?
Yeah, well, I would say, Scott, that it comes down into four different things, really. The first thing is that it's generic. So it has the ability to build pretty much any instrument into it in the multi-user systems that we can offer. The second thing is that it's very simple and it's elegant at the same time, but it's really focused on the user experience. And we did this by using lots of focus groups of both practitioners and clients to get their feedback of what do they want to have in the system that would be most useful to them. The third thing I would say is it's very flexible in the sense that it allows a multitude of pathways for data entry. So whether it's working remotely with clients where you need to send an email link to the client to fill in the measure online, or whether it's using it electronically in something like a tablet or even a smartphone in the room with the client, or whether it's afterwards inputting the data from paper. All of that is available within the system. And I think the fourth thing I would say then is that there are some very important features. Number one, I've just mentioned already, is the ability to send a secure email link. The second one, I think, which is really quite unique, is to be able to track clients' problems, issues, or goals in their own words, session by session. Now that, I think, is quite something different. The third thing is we have a very simple traffic light system, more about in a minute, that flags up whether people are progressing or failing to progress. And the final thing is that you can look at your case list by practitioner, by practice, by supervision group, or by organization. And we believe that this really encourages reflective self-supervision, if you like. So it becomes immediately obvious how you're getting on with your own case list. Quickly identifying the clients that are progressing or failing to progress.
I think something that we really know is that both the consumer of the service and the treatment professional have to be engaged in whatever feedback is being sought and given. So how does Pragmatic Tracker help the clinician pay attention?
So I suppose Pragmatic Tracker addresses this at different levels. For example, when you look at a list of your own cases, you can identify which clients are at risk very quickly of making no progress in treatment. And then when you move further into looking at a particular case, you can then simply go to that client's chart and you've got graphical representation immediately obvious to you of where the client is with the particular measures you're looking at and how much improvement or lack of improvement has taken place.
Okay, so it seems like on the consumer side, you have a variety of ways for them to report their experience to you, multiple different types of measures, including the ability for clinicians to track the client's own words, their problem statements about why they're there. You have on the clinician side a variety of measures to choose from that they can piece together and use. There is an email feature that clinicians and clients can connect between visits or prior to visits. That certainly makes it much easier. I'm wondering, given all of the functionality, this must be quite expensive.
We are really in the business of promoting and encouraging practitioners internationally to work with feedback. Of course, what we wanted to do is to have a system that's as inexpensive as possible because we realize finance is always such a priority. For example, what we call the special system that features ORS and SRS on its own, we're selling that for £75 a year license, which is about $120 a year. It's about $10 a month, basically.
In surveys, you look at the number, or the percentage of clinicians who actually use some type of tool in their practice. The numbers drop significantly. And when you ask about the reasons why, there are two primary reasons cited. The first one is philosophical objections to it, and the second one is practical barriers. It's going to take too much time. It's going to get in the way of my relationship with clients. Can you comment on either of those kinds of objections that clinicians might have?
The amazing thing I've found with working with hundreds of clinicians over the last 7 years is that when clinicians actually engage in working in this way, they will never go back. But of course, the other thing is that whether we like it or not, increasingly, particularly anyone involved in public sector organizations, we have this constant issue of accountability, and there's just no getting away from it anymore. Our position is to try to facilitate that in as easy and as efficient a manner as possible.
Bill, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about Pragmatic Tracker. It's exciting to see a system that is as pragmatic as this one, that has been well thought out, that approaches clients in so many different ways, gives them the opportunity to feed back to us in so many different ways. Is there anything you want to add before we say goodbye?
Thank you very, very much for your time. It's always great to talk to you, and you remain a great mentor for me, and I'm always interested in following your latest thinking. Once again, just thank you very much for taking the time to chat about Pragmatic Tracker.
My pleasure, Bill.
Thank you.